let me tell you, that's a very good point you brought up. When you look at what it costs to produce, let's say, a pound of heroin, it costs conservatively $100 to produce a pound of heroin. And all the while it's going up through the illegal drug channels, I know if I produce it for 100, I can sell it to the next guy for 300, and on and on and on. And by the time it hits the streets of West Hartford, Connecticut, that same pound that was produced for $100 now is worth $60,000 upwards, depending on how you cut it.
So, wow.
That's true. And what we see happening with the drug so-called war,
Yeah.
as we call it,
Yeah.
is that money, that profit, drives so much violence. A problem that we have as law enforcement and even as citizens is we don't really know how much violence is actually connected to the drug war. Because if somebody is shot on a street corner in a drive-by shooting, it may very well be drug-related.
It probably is.
But unless it is reported as drug-related, it goes down as a homicide.
Well, let me interject something. We are limited in time, and we're going to get to some solutions soon. But I just want to say, I've been doing volunteer work with the Hartford school system for 18 years, and I think there's a link also with the problems we have in our inner city schools with drugs. I think it's really hard to convince kids to stay in school and graduate from high school and go to college in order to get a good job when they see, people driving around their neighborhood in fancy cars selling drugs with lots of money. They don't see that they end up in prison 5 years later and possibly dead or something like that, but it's hard to convince them that education matters when they see people like that in their neighborhood. And they have the same problem during prohibition of alcohol. Prohibition of alcohol created organized crime in this country, and it made drinking exciting. Drinking doubled during Prohibition from before Prohibition, and the people who had all the money were the mobsters who were selling the alcohol, and it made it exciting, and people would go to speakeasies, and they felt like they were part of a club. And I think that's what's going on with drugs now as well. I think there's a real strong parallel between the failure of the prohibition of alcohol and the failure with prohibition of drugs.
I personally think the greater society thinks our children are stupid. And what you're talking about is multifaceted in the fact that when a particular child sees that there are two forms of justice, one form of justice for them and another form of justice, let's just say for former Governor Rowland's children and Mayor Malloy down in Stamford, his children, and the ex-mayor of Bridgeport, Fabrizi, when they're doing the same things and not getting any jail time, and the black and brown or poor whites, they're getting enormous amounts of the same thing for
There's a big equity problem.
And see, when you start looking at our children, right away we label our children as being stupid. They're grasping at what they think will get them there because they know they're marked already, especially within the inner city, and they want to get it quick as possible. You hear young black and brown teenage girls telling you, I want to get pregnant because now I have something I can cherish and that will love me back. That's saying a lot. The fabric of our entire society is starting to erode. And everything that's happening in the black community will eventually happen in the greater and larger white community. It's happening now.
Well, it's already happening. Teen pregnancy rates are now just as high and across the board. Right. But so we don't have a huge amount of time. Let's talk about what you mean by legalization of drugs. Imagine that you were in control and you could implement whatever you wanted to implement. What do you envision the system to be?
I believe that cigarettes are, in fact, one of the most deadly drugs in society today. I am addicted, okay? Nicotine, extremely deadly. We decided a long time ago that we would make them legal and control them and deal with the side effects. 450,000 people a year die, 8.5 million more people suffer from serious diseases related to smoking. 450,000 people die, 85,000 people die as a result of alcoholism.
85,000.
85,000 people. Now, that's the figure that's put out by the CDC.
Right.
Does that necessarily mean that in
Right.
fact is the figure? No, but it's the figure that's recognized.
Right.
But we
So-
knew back in 1933 that we would not solve the alcohol problem when we repealed prohibition.
Right.
We would simply take the violence out of it. We would take the humongous profit out of it. We took the violence out. That's what we were after.
Right.
We knew we were going to have drunk driving. We knew we were going to have alcoholism. Same thing is going to happen with any of the illegal drugs. Once they are legalized, controlled, and medicalized the way they should be, then they can be controlled by the government rather than controlled by criminals.
I'm going to read. Go ahead.
And what I think is this, we got to look at this realistically. We got to go from a war economy to a peace economy. And just looking at the state of Connecticut, the state of Connecticut has a $600 million plus operating budget for its prison system. And we have 3.5 million people in the state of Connecticut. We could effectively give every man, woman, and child $1 million health policy and cut out the insurance companies if we legalize, medicalize, and decriminalize all of these drugs. We're not even talking about the $9 or $10 million we would get directly from the outright legalization.
So let me explain that. So we imagine, in fact, let me read this. This is a book that I recommend. In fact, I recommend two books that I read that got me educated. One is written by a conservative Republican who worked for Ronald Reagan. The other one is a liberal academic. Ending the War on Drugs by Dirk Chase Eldridge, and Legalize This, The Case for Decriminalizing Drugs, Douglas Huzak, 2000 and 2002. So we've been talking about this for years. My Solution for America offers help to all. First, the creation of a state government-sponsored and enforced policy of distribution and sale of drugs. So it would be state stores that would sell drugs, something like that, where you could go in and purchase the drugs from the state, thus redirecting the profits from the pockets of the cartels into state governments, where by law they would be used to combat drug use and abuse. The crime and violence currently accompanying illegal drug use and sales would cease. I won't read the rest, but William F. Buckley supported this position too, and he was a very strong conservative.
Conservative of conservatives.
Right, and so, this is not a conservative liberal argument. This is just a common sense, knowing the facts, doing a harm reduction argument.
Well, harm reduction followed to its logical end is legalization.
Right.
Understand that. The most important thing I think we have to realize is this, is that legalization without indemnification is totally irresponsible. If we just legalize drugs and walk away, that's crazy.
That's not going to work.
We have to look at how are we going to shift, just in the state of Connecticut, the hundreds of millions of dollars back into those communities and putting forth after-school programs, revolutionizing our public education system, revolutionizing our higher education system. The money is there, it's just the will of the people to get there. And I'll close with this. There is no drug known to man that becomes safer when the production and distribution is handed over to criminals. And that's the war on drugs.
Oh, thank you both very much. Unfortunately, we're pretty much out of time. I'm going to read one more thing. Reading may not be the best way to communicate, but this was in an editorial by Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize winner who I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. And he writes, "Our political system's ability to deal with real problems has been degraded to such an extent that I sometimes wonder whether the country is still governable." And this is the problem when we have career politicians who care more about getting reelected every 2 years or every 4 years or every 6 years than they care about solving long-term problems and doing quantitative, calm, intelligent public policy analysis about what's best for the country long-term. And that's why I'm running for office, is we need someone who will have these kinds of conversations and fight for solutions to long-term problems. And I want to thank you both very much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.